Hey everybody, Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share a quick revisit to the Sony Alpha A6000. This is a mirrorless interchangeable lens camera from Sony with a 24 megapixel APS-C sensor, essentially the same class sensor you'd find in a digital SLR. Of course, this camera is considerably smaller though than any digital SLR on the market. This isn't a new trend, clearly. APS-C size sensors have been in Sony mirrorless cameras for some number of years, and I've been covering them pretty much ever since, and that's because it has changed the way we capture great pictures, both with regard to still and video quality. Sony has changed the game, in my opinion, and if you follow my channel, then you already know that I clearly think that. The A6000 in many ways embodies all of those years of work. It carries a low price tag, includes an OLED viewfinder on the left side of the body that admittedly does have a lower resolution than years past on premium models, but Sony has found, at least in my opinion, the right balance or compromise with regard to price and performance. So not only do we have a sensor that is comparable to what used to be in the NEX7, the flagship of the E-mount before full frame was introduced, but we also have some best-in-class autofocus performance. Now 11 frames per second continuous autofocus, which is still some of the fastest that you're going to see in the mirrorless world. NFC and Wi-Fi, these aren't new things. You've got access to the Play Memory Store, which the application market just keeps growing for. They even have beta applications now, something I'll probably be covering down the road. And the apps range in price from free, $5, $10. There's a live video grading app that's fantastic, especially once 4K gets introduced. But if 4K isn't necessary on your photographic menu, the A6000 really does check all of the possible boxes that you could possibly want in a compact, I would say, APS-C class camera. Now, the other option is something like this would be a micro four thirds option, because even though there are some competing models on the way, none of them have the ecosystem of glass that Sony has established for the E-mount. The complaint was always there wasn't enough glass. Well, now with the most recent announcement of all the FE glass, there is an abundance of compatible glass for a camera like this. Granted, FE lenses, because they are full frame, are much more expensive than a lens like the 50mm f1.8 that I have here, but that's why I'm sharing this, because at its price, this is arguably one of the sharpest lenses that money can buy in the E-mount world. And that makes it important, especially to someone who's starting out, a novice who just wants to get the basics of photography in the hobby, or to the pro that wants a backup camera with really, again, exceptional image quality and a lens to match it, because a kit lens isn't going to produce the sort of quality that this 50mm prime will. At launch, this was only a silver lens. They updated it, finally brought black. I mean, those were the little changes Sony has made over the years. Thankfully, now they've made some big ones. So the 11 frames per second continuous autofocus is something I really love about this camera. Everything else is just the lineage of the NEX brand that is now Alpha. And really, that was a consolidation of brand, because Sony wanted customers to recognize that the NEX brand wasn't really separate from the Alpha brand in terms of representing Sony's best-in-class DI. After all, both are interchangeable lens camera systems, and I think things were getting lost in the shuffle. And with the shift towards a heavy focus on E-mount glass, it was clear this had to become Alpha. It had to start sporting what Sony had branded for their top gear with regard to digital imaging. And the A6000 really does deliver. I have to say that at its price, go ahead and feel free to chime in the comments in terms of what body you can possibly buy right now with a similar form factor and overall performance. Granted, I wish we had xavc-s video here. Maybe we'll get it in the form of a firmware update. Sony has only given that to the RX10. I'm not sure why a camera like this wouldn't see it. Granted, the RX10 is more expensive. This appeals to a far broader audience, because still there are many people that prefer to have interchangeable lens capability. And at its price point, even with the kit or body only, this is still one of the best pieces of kit that money can buy, which is why I'm revisiting it today. This thing comes with me just about everywhere in terms of as a backup camera. And my full frame E-mount 70-200 G piece of glass, I won't say lives on this, but when I'm out there with the FE, glass system, and I've got my A7R, usually I do have the 70 to 200 on here just because I get a little bit more reach because of the crop factor. And on top of that, that 11 frames per second hybrid autofocus system comes to life on that piece of glass. So great autofocus performance on a piece of lens, or a piece of glass, excuse me, piece of lens, that's a new one, that deserves it, which is why I like that pairing so much. So the A6000, definitely still worth consideration. When I look at the field of different mirrorless cameras out there right now, I'm not really seeing anything that competes with it pound for pound, dollar for dollar. Yes, a lot of new offerings coming from the competition, specifically Canon and Nikon, Panasonic even with some really interesting cameras this year, and I will be looking at those because much like Sony, they are pushing the envelope. They're trying to set new standards. In fact, that's part of the reason we saw Sony push out a firmware update to the RX10. Sony saw that the FZ1000 that I covered was attracting buyers, and video was something that, on the RX10 especially, a much better video camera in many ways than the FZ1000, they had to address. They had to boast its features. Well, here with the A6000, they have another great opportunity. Unfortunately, they haven't taken advantage of it. Maybe they will. Either way, just on a photographic level, this camera produces images in quality, and low light performance is great, by the way, too, if I didn't touch on that, that you just aren't going to find from any other manufacturer in the price range, form factor, and again, with a full ecosystem of glass that accommodates affordable budgets, as well as those that are restricted or restrictive in nature, as well as those who want to buy Zeiss glass, buy manual lenses, or use any piece of glass with an adapter that you may already own. Because remember, great thing about E-mount lenses, or the mount itself, is that you don't have to buy autofocus native glass. You can go ahead and get an adapter and put any lens from any manufacturer on here and go manual and use peaking. Now, that's an old cliche at this point with Sony gear already for most in the industry, but it's still a necessary reality, a truth, something that Sony was sure of to create at the onset because they didn't have a lot of E-mount glass at the beginning. So that's still an advantage that this camera has, and whether, again, you're new to Sony, new to photography, this is going to give you another level of image and video quality that you're just not going to get at this price from anybody else. And the QX1, the lens style camera that has a very similar sensor to this, don't even begin to compare those, even though I may have to do a video on that for many of you since it will be inherent, because it seems like an inexpensive backdoor to the A6000. Keep in mind that's a lower rated sensor. It doesn't have a real camera built around it. It's just a sensor with the ability to attach the same lenses, APS-C E-mount lenses, that you would with the A6000, but there's no viewfinder, no LCD screen, articulating screen at that. You're not going to have similar battery life. It will have Wi-Fi and NFC, but without a smartphone or tablet, you're shooting blind with that device. So while it's great for certain angles, it in no way is a direct competitor to the A6000. But I am sure people are going to think it is because they did with the RX100 and, of course, the QX100. Many people thought that it was a less expensive way of getting that same sensor and overall experience. But the QX line does not give you anywhere near the intuitive and user-friendly, I would say customizable experience that this small form factor camera is able to deliver with all of its buttons that just simply do not exist in a QX world. But of course the QX is aimed at those of you that rely on your phone for all of your imaging and sharing of images, and Sony just wants to give you a better way to do that. I think the better way is to buy the A6000. But again, this is a great camera. It's going to live on for some time. I haven't heard of a refresh on it yet. Sony has already, of course, put out the A5100. I have not covered it. If you are really interested in me covering it, I may. But to me, the A6000 for the price difference is the way to go, and that's why I haven't covered it. Here at the Digest, I choose what I think is worthy of all of you really getting a review from me. And in this instance, the A6000 is clearly the better camera all around. Even though the A5100 is less expensive, The price difference for performance ratio purposes at least makes the A6000 the superior camera to own in every way. And again, you will not be disappointed with the 50mm f1.8 prime. It still really is one of the best pieces of glass. I've mentioned it over and over again. I mean, it's compact. It will give you stunning, sharp images that will really make you wonder why you ever carried that large bridge-style camera or digital SLR with an APS-C sensor, because again, this just redefines. It's like a miniaturized kit. I have no other way of putting it. That's what Sony began with and to this day is still continuing with. And the FE platform and full frame also redefining expectations for full frame imaging tools. Any questions or comments, please feel free to post them. And of course, as usual, please feel free to subscribe. Later.